The storm over Varela Prime was not made of clouds and rain. It was fire, smoke, and streaks of burning metal falling from the sky. The city below looked like a sea of broken towers and flames. Ships screamed through the air, exchanging bright bursts of laser fire. Somewhere deep inside that chaos, a distress signal kept repeating on an open channel. Mark sat inside the cockpit of his small landing craft, staring at the blinking red light on his comm panel. He was a human engineer, not a soldier, and this was supposed to be a routine job. His cargo ship was parked safely above the planet, but when he caught the signal, something in him refused to ignore it. He tapped the controls, trying to get a clear reading. The signal was weak, fading in and out under the noise of battle. It carried one word he understood clearly: help. His training told him to stay out of it. The war between the Varelian people and their enemies was dangerous and not the business of a lone human traveler. But his heart told him something else. Someone was down there, trapped and running out of time. With a deep breath, Mark turned the landing craft toward the surface. Flames flashed past the windows as he broke through the atmosphere. The closer he got, the more destruction he saw. Streets were ripped apart, buildings crumbled, and the air shimmered with heat from the fires. The signal pulled him toward the eastern edge of the city, where a large transport ship had crashed into the side of a wide plaza. The landing craft touched down hard, skidding slightly on the cracked stone. Mark grabbed his repair kit, a small portable scanner, and a breathing mask before running toward the wreck. The transport's hull was split open like the shell of a broken egg. Sparks rained from torn wires. The inside was dark, lit only by flickering lights. A low groan reached his ears. He climbed over broken panels and entered the ship. The smell of burned metal filled the air. His scanner beeped, showing one life sign ahead. Moving quickly, he found her. She was pinned under a collapsed support beam, dressed in torn ceremonial, robes marked with silver patterns. Her skin had a faint golden tone, and her eyes were bright even in the dim light. Mark had seen Varelians before, but never one like her. She looked at him with a mix of pain and pride, as if she refused to show weakness even now. "You are human," she said, her voice steady despite her condition. "Yes," Mark replied, kneeling beside her. "I am here to help." She did not argue. He set his repair kit down and pulled out a compact plasma cutter. Sparks flew as he sliced through the beam. The metal fell aside with a heavy thud. Carefully, he helped her to her feet. She staggered, but did not fall. "What is your name?" Mark asked as they moved toward the exit. "Laura," she said. "Queen of Varela." Mark blinked. He had heard the name before. Every news broadcast in this region had spoken of her. She was a leader known for trying to bring peace, even during the war. That meant her survival was more than important. It could decide the fate of her people. Before they could reach the landing craft, an explosion shook the plaza. Enemy soldiers were closing in, their armor dark and marked with red insignia. Laura's guards were nowhere to be seen. Mark grabbed her arm and pulled her into the cover of a fallen wall. "This way," he whispered, pointing toward a side street. They moved quickly through the ruins, keeping low. The sound of blaster fire echoed behind them. Twice they had to stop and hide as patrols passed by. Laura never complained, even when she stumbled over debris. Mark could see the determination in her eyes. She was not just trying to survive, she was holding herself together for the sake of her people. Finally, they reached the landing craft. Mark helped her inside and sealed the hatch. The engines roared to life, lifting them off the ground. From the cockpit, he could see the city shrinking below them, the fires painting the sky in orange and red. Laura watched silently, her hands gripping the seat. Once they cleared the atmosphere, Mark set a course for a safe orbital path away from the battle. Only then did Laura speak again. "You risked your life for me," she said. "Why?" Mark thought for a moment. "Because you needed help. That was enough." Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment. as if trying to understand something about him. Then she nodded. They spent the night aboard the small craft, floating above the planet while the war raged far below. In the quiet of the cabin, they spoke about their worlds. Lura told him of Virella's history, of the rich forests and silver rivers that once filled the planet. Mark spoke of the small human colony where he grew up, a place with endless open skies. They found small points of connection, things that made them smile despite the danger. At some point, exhaustion overcame them both. Lura rested against the wall, her breathing calm. Mark stayed awake a little longer, watching the stars drift past the window. He knew that when morning came, the war would still be there, and his part in it might not be welcome. But for now, the simple fact that she was alive felt like a victory. When the first light of the planet's twin suns touched the cabin, Mark made his choice. While Lura still slept, he quietly prepared the craft for departure. He set the navigation to guide her to the nearest safe Virelian-controlled station. Before stepping out, he left something on the seat beside her, a small human insignia pin from his own uniform. Then he boarded a small shuttle pod and slipped away, disappearing into the vastness of space. By the time Lura woke, he was gone. But she kept the pin in her hand, holding it as she stared out the window at the endless stars. She did not know how, but she was certain she would see him again. The day Mark left Virella Prime faded into memory like a dream. He never told anyone the full story. On paper, he had been working a routine salvage job in a quiet system. There was no mention of a war zone, no record of a Virelian queen, and certainly no mention of saving her life. He had done what felt right, but he knew the rules. Humans were not supposed to interfere in Virelian conflicts. Breaking that rule could cost him more than his career. It could put him in prison. So, Mark kept moving. He joined a deep space salvage crew called the Horizon Star, a slow but dependable ship that drifted between the forgotten corners of the galaxy. They hunted for abandoned freighters, old mining stations, and derelict warships. The work was dangerous at times, but it was also quiet. Mark liked that. It gave him space to think. Some nights, when the engines hummed and the stars filled the windows, his mind went back to Virella Prime. He remembered the sound of falling metal, the way Lura's voice stayed calm under pressure, and the strange feeling he had when she looked at him. He told himself it was just the memory of a dangerous day, nothing more. But the image of her holding his insignia pin stayed sharp in his thoughts. Far away, in a rebuilt palace on Virella Prime, Lura carried her own memory. The war had ended in a fragile peace 2 years after that night. Many cities were still in ruins, but her people had begun to rebuild. Every day was filled with meetings, speeches, and decisions that could shape the future of her world. Yet in the quiet hours between duties, her thoughts returned to the human who had appeared from the smoke and carried her to safety. Her advisors told her it was unlikely she would see him again. Humans traveled widely, and few stayed in one place long enough to be found. But Lura had resources they did not. She began to search quietly. She asked trusted traders and explorers if they had heard of a human salvager with quick thinking and a stubborn streak. A few told her stories that almost fit. Someone repairing a stranded freighter in the rim systems, or fixing a mining rig on a remote moon. But every lead vanished before she could act. For Mark, the years passed with a mix of routine and risk. One month, he was patching a hole in the side of a cargo barge drifting near an asteroid belt. The next, he was crawling through the dark corridors of a warship abandoned decades ago. Salvage work paid well when the find was valuable, but it was also lonely. Crews often came together for a job, then split apart to chase other opportunities. Mark stayed with the Horizon Star because it was steady and because no one asked too many questions about his past. He avoided jobs near Virelian territory. Part of him feared that returning might cause trouble for both him and Lura. Another part feared that if he saw her again, the quiet life he had built would disappear. Yet, despite his caution, he sometimes found himself scanning news bulletins from her region. He saw reports of her efforts to rebuild the forests destroyed in the war, of her trade agreements with neighboring systems, and of her speeches calling for unity. Each time he felt a strange pride, as if her success meant something personal to him. One cold evening on the Horizon Star, Mark was working in the engine bay when the crew's pilot, Danor, wandered in holding a datapad. "Got an interesting rumor," Danor said. "Big Varelian ship spotted near the border systems, royal markings. Some say it's the Queen herself on a diplomatic trip." Mark kept his hands busy on the engine panel. And, Danor continued, "they're traveling without a heavy escort. Guess they trust their route is safe." Mark didn't reply. He told himself it was none of his concern. But that night, he lay awake in his cabin, listening to the low hum of the ship, wondering what it would be like if their paths crossed again. He told himself it would never happen. The galaxy was too big, and they lived in different worlds. Lura's search, however, never truly stopped. By the 5th year, after her rescue, she had narrowed her leads to a handful of human salvage crews operating near the trade borders. One report caught her attention. A small group had been seen repairing a derelict freighter in a quiet system not far from her route to a diplomatic meeting. One of them matched the description she carried in her memory, a man with steady hands, and eyes that measured every risk before acting. She ordered her ship to make a detour. On the Horizon Star, life carried on as usual. The crew was in the middle of stripping parts from a half-broken freighter when Mark noticed a signal on his scanner. A large vessel had entered the system. Its hull gleamed with silver and deep blue, marked with the symbols of the Varelian royal family. He froze for a moment, staring at the display. Royal ships were rare in these parts. They traveled on official business, not for salvage work. Yet here one was, closing distance toward their position. Mark felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. He had no reason to believe it was connected to him, but part of him knew. The odds were too strange for this to be random. As the massive vessel drew nearer, the Horizon Star's crew gathered at the docking bay. The royal ship's airlock connected with a smooth hiss, and the doors began to open. Mark stood at the edge of the crowd, unsure whether to step forward or slip away. But when the first figure stepped through, he forgot every plan. It was her. Queen Lura walked into the salvage bay wearing a fitted travel uniform with her royal crest at the collar. Her golden-toned skin caught the light, and her eyes swept the room until they found him. The years had not dimmed their sharpness. The moment her gaze locked on him, the noise in the bay seemed to fade. "Mark," she said, her voice carrying the same steady strength he remembered. The crew turned to stare at him. Mark felt as if the ground had shifted under his feet. He hadn't expected her to remember his name, let alone speak it in front of an entire salvage crew. In that instant, 5 years of distance vanished. The fires of Varela Prime, the quiet, night under twin moons, and the moment they had parted all came rushing back. Lura took a step toward him. "We need to talk." The salvage bay of the Horizon Star felt strangely small. The crew stood in a loose circle, their eyes moving between the tall, dignified Varelian queen and the human engineer who had just been called by name. Mark could hear the soft hum of the royal vessel through the floor, a deep vibration that seemed to echo in his chest. Lura stood only a few paces away, her posture perfectly straight. Time had added a certain weight to her presence. Her golden-toned skin seemed warmer under. The bay lights and her eyes carried a steady confidence that came from leading a world through recovery. But when she looked at Mark, there was something else in her gaze, something from the night they had shared 5 years ago, high above the burning streets of Varela Prime. Mark felt every crew member's eyes on him. The silence stretched until Danor, the pilot, cleared his throat. Mark, Danor said slowly. You know the Queen of Virella. Mark kept his gaze on Laura. We've met. That is one way to say it, Laura replied, her voice calm but unmistakably direct. I have been searching for you for years. The crew exchanged glances, clearly unsure what was happening. Laura's guards waited at the airlock, standing still but watchful. Mark realized that whatever this was, it was not casual. She had come here for a reason. Can we speak somewhere private? Laura asked. Mark nodded. He led her toward the small conference room at the edge of the salvage bay. The door slid shut behind them, muting the noise from the rest of the crew. The room was simple: metal walls, a narrow table, and 2 chairs. Laura did not sit right. Away. She looked around as if weighing the space, then turned back to him. You left without saying goodbye, she said. Her tone was steady, but there was no mistaking the meaning behind the words. Mark let out a slow breath. If I stayed, I would have broken the rules of my people. Humans were not supposed to interfere in your war. If they knew I was there, saving you, it could have caused trouble for both of us. You saved my life, Laura said, her eyes never leaving his. That is not something I forget. I wasn't looking for thanks, Mark said. I just did what I thought was right. Laura stepped closer, studying him as if trying to see if he was the same person from that night. You are the same, she said quietly. And yet you are not. Time changes us all. Mark could not help but notice that she still wore the small insignia pin he had left behind, now attached to a silver chain around her wrist. The sight of it sent an unexpected warmth through him. What brought you here? He asked. I am on a diplomatic mission, Laura replied. But that is not the full truth. I arranged my route to pass through this system because I learned you might be here. I came to find you. Mark frowned. Why? She met his eyes without hesitation. Because I need your help again. Mark leaned back slightly, trying to read her expression. Help with what? There is a danger, Laura said. A weapon from the old war has resurfaced. It was lost during the final days of the conflict, and I believed it destroyed, but now it has been found in the hands of people who have no understanding of its power. If they use it, it could start a war greater than the one we ended. That's not a small problem, Mark said. No, Laura agreed. Which is why I am here. My own people cannot move without drawing attention. If we try to take the weapon openly, our enemies will see it as an act of aggression. I need someone who can move quietly, without political ties. Someone who knows how to get into places others cannot. Someone like you. Mark looked down at the table. Salvage work had taught him how to find things hidden in dangerous places. He had gone into derelict ships filled with traps, and he had pulled valuable tech from wrecks most crews would not touch. But what she was asking was not just salvage, it was stepping into the shadows of a war that was supposed to be over. You could find another human, Mark said. One who's not connected to you. I could, Laura said, but I do not want to. I trust you. I know how you think. And I believe you are not the kind of person who would turn away when lives are at stake. Mark felt the weight of her words. He remembered the burning city, the sound of explosions, the moment he had lifted her from the wreckage. He remembered the quiet night above Virella, when for a few hours the war had felt far away. He had left to protect them both, but now here, she was asking him to step back into her world. What exactly would I need to do? He asked. Laura's voice was calm, but her eyes held urgency. Travel with me. We will follow the trail of the weapon. We will need to go through dangerous sectors, abandoned stations, and possibly enemy territory. I can provide the resources and protection, but you will guide the search. And when we find it, you will know how to disable it." Mark let out a slow sigh. He knew saying yes would change everything. His quiet life aboard the Horizon Star would be over. But if he said no, the thought of that weapon falling into the wrong hands would follow him forever. "All right," Mark said finally. "I'll help." For the first time since she stepped into the salvage bay, Laura's expression softened. "I knew you would." They left the conference room together. The crew of the Horizon Star stared as Mark and the Queen crossed the bay. Laura's guards fell in step behind her as she returned to her ship. Mark paused at the airlock. "I'll gather my gear," he said. "I will have a cabin prepared for you," Laura replied. "We leave as soon as you are ready." As the airlock closed behind her, Mark felt the strange, sharp awareness that life was about to shift. The routine days of salvage work were gone. Ahead lay unknown dangers, old ruins, and the company of the one person he had thought never to see again. The royal vessel Silver Wing was a sharp contrast to the Horizon Star. Everything inside was polished, from the silver-lined walls to the soft glow of the ceiling lights. The corridors were wide enough for two guards to walk side by side without brushing shoulders. Mark felt out of place as he followed one of Laura's attendants toward the cabin prepared for him. His boots left faint scuffs on the spotless floor, and the air smelled faintly of clean metal and some sweet Varelian herb. The cabin was larger than the quarters he had used for years on the salvage ship. A wide window looked out into the star field, and the bed was covered in dark blue fabric marked with the royal crest. He set his small bag on the table, unsure if he should unpack. Before he could think about it further, there was a soft knock on the door. Laura stepped inside without waiting for him to answer. She was no longer wearing her travel coat. Instead, she had changed into a light uniform that allowed her to move easily. Even dressed simply, her presence filled the room. She closed the door behind her and faced him. "We have some time before we reach our first destination," she said. "I want you to understand what we are walking into." Mark nodded. "I was hoping you would explain." She crossed the room and sat in one of the chairs near the window. The faint light of distant stars reflected in her eyes. "The weapon we are looking for was built in the last months of the war. It was called the Solar Lance. It can take the energy of a small sun and focus it into a single destructive strike. One use could wipe out a fleet or destroy a world's surface." Mark frowned. "And it was lost?" "Yes. During the final retreat of our enemies, they stole it from our storage vault. But the ship carrying it was destroyed before it could leave the system. We believe the wreck sank deep into the atmosphere of a gas giant, unrecoverable. Now, reports say pieces of the weapon have appeared on the black market. That means someone found the wreck, or what was left of it." Mark leaned against the table, crossing his arms. "If it's that dangerous, why not send your military to get it?" Laura shook her head. "If my forces move, every spy in the region will know. Our old enemies will think we are preparing for war again. They will respond, and the peace we built will fall apart before the weapon is even found. That is why I need you. A single human ship can move quietly. No one will see it as a threat." Mark considered her words. "And you came personally. That seems risky." "I came because I wanted to," she said, "and because I trust you more than I trust some distant agent who does not know what they are truly carrying." Mark looked out the window. Stars drifted past slowly, silent and cold. "You're asking me to walk into a situation where a lot of people might not want us to succeed." "That is true," Laura said, "but I have faced worse with less help." For a moment, they simply sat in the quiet hum of the ship. Mark remembered how she had looked in the burning streets of Virella Prime, calm, determined, even with enemy soldiers closing in. That same steadiness was still in her now. "You know," Mark said after a pause, "I never thought I'd see you again." I knew I would, Laura replied. From the moment I woke on that ship and found your insignia, I decided our story was not finished. He gave a faint smile. Stories like this don't usually end well. Then we will make ours an exception, she said. The soft chime of the ship's intercom broke the moment. A voice announced that they would arrive at their next waypoint in 2 hours. Laura stood. Rest while you can. The first lead we have is in the Trian Belt. It is a dangerous place, full of smugglers and scavengers. If someone there has part of the solar lance, they will not give it up easily. After she left, Mark sat down on the bed, staring at the floor. It had been years since he worked with anyone outside a salvage crew, and never on something this serious. But part of him felt a strange pull toward the mission, as if some old thread between him and Laura had been picked up again after years of being hidden. 2 hours later, the Silver Wing dropped out of hyperspace near the Trian Belt. The view from the bridge was a slow-moving river of rock and metal chunks, each one reflecting the pale light of a distant sun. Hidden among the drifting debris were ships of all sizes, some active, others nothing but wreckage. It was the kind of place where secrets could stay hidden for decades. Laura stood at the center of the bridge, giving orders in a calm voice. Mark stayed near her side, scanning the belt with the ship's sensors. A faint energy reading caught his eye. There, he said, pointing to a cluster of asteroids shaped like a jagged ring. Something's running power in that section. Could be a hidden dock. The ship's helmsman turned toward the coordinates, weaving through the floating debris. As they drew closer, the reading grew stronger. Soon the shape of a small station came into view, half buried in the rock. Its outer walls were patched with mismatched metal plates, and the faint blue glow of shield generators shimmered in the dark. That is a smuggler's hideout, Laura said. They will not welcome us. Then we don't give them time to prepare, Mark replied. They approached slowly, broadcasting a false signal that marked them as a simple trade vessel. The station allowed them to dock, but Mark could see small weapons turrets tracking their every move. Inside the docking bay, a group of rough-looking scavengers waited, armed but not openly hostile. Laura and Mark stepped forward together. The leader of the scavengers, a tall figure with pale skin and a patch over one eye, gave them a narrow look. "You're far from royal space, Queen. What brings you here?" Laura's voice was smooth. "We are here for something that belongs to my people. It was stolen long ago." The scavenger leader's smile was thin. "And why would I have it?" "Because I know you do," Laura said. "And because we can pay." Mark watched the man's expression change. Money might open doors here, but so could the quiet threat in Laura's voice. One way or another, they were going to get answers. The air inside the smuggler station was heavy with the smell of engine oil and recycled air. Dim lights flickered above, casting long shadows over the rough metal walls. Mark could feel the weight of every gaze in the docking bay. The scavenger leader, the one with the patch over his eye, kept his arms crossed while his crew stood ready behind him. Laura did not flinch. She stepped forward slowly, her presence steady and unshaken. "We are here for a piece of technology," she said. "It came from a ship lost in the gas giant Sothra 5 years ago. I believe you have it." The leader gave a short laugh. "And what if I do? That kind of thing is worth a fortune to the right buyer. Why give it to you?" "Because it is dangerous," Laura said. "More dangerous than you think. You would be wise to let it go." The man's good eye narrowed. "Dangerous things are the most profitable." Mark stepped forward, his voice even. "If you keep it, others will come for it. Not just us. People who won't talk first. They'll take it by force and leave nothing behind." The leader studied him for a moment, then smirked. "You talk like you've seen that before." "I have," Mark replied, "and you don't want to be on the wrong end of it." There was a tense silence before the man finally spoke again. "I don't have it here. but I know who does. And if you're so eager to risk your lives, I can point you in their direction for a price." Laura's voice was cool. "Name it." 50,000 credits, the man said. "Up front." Mark knew that was an outrageous amount for information. Laura seemed to think the same, but she did not argue. Instead, she gave a short nod. "You will be paid, but if your information is false, I will return, and I will not be in a patient mood." Something in her tone made the leader's smirk fade slightly. "It's true enough. A crew called the Grey Talons has your part. They operate out of an abandoned war station in the outer rim of this belt. You'll find it at these coordinates." Laura signaled one of her guards, who handed over a small case of credits. The leader opened it, eyes glinting at the sight of the payment. Without another word, Laura turned and walked back toward the silver wing, with Mark following close behind. Once aboard, they moved to the bridge. The coordinates were fed into the navigation system, and the ship turned away from the station. The moment they were clear of its docking bay, Laura leaned slightly toward Mark. "He was lying about one thing," she said. "The Grey Talons do not just operate from that station. They control it entirely. It will not be a quiet approach." Mark gave a short nod. "Then we should be ready before we get there." They spent the next few hours preparing. The Silver Wing was equipped for defense but not for heavy combat. Mark worked with the engineering crew to reinforce the ship's shields and calibrate its sensors for detecting energy spikes that might reveal hidden traps. Laura coordinated with her guards, outlining a boarding plan in case they needed to enter the station. The war station came into view at the edge of the belt. It was a massive structure, its central ring split and hanging slightly apart, as if the metal itself had grown tired. Large pieces of armor plating were missing, revealing the tangled framework beneath. Despite its damaged state, the station was still alive with faint lights, and several small ships circled it like watchful predators. Mark studied the sensor display. "They know we're here." Laura stepped closer to the console. "We will not hide. Open a channel." A crackling voice came through the comm. "Unidentified ship. State your business." "This is the Silver Wing, royal vessel of Virella," Laura said firmly. "We wish to speak to the leader of the Grey Talons." There was a pause, then a cold reply. "Dock at Bay 12, and do not try anything clever." The Silver Wing eased into the docking bay. Inside, the walls were covered in faded banners bearing the mark of the Grey Talons, a jagged silver claw. Armed guards lined the walkways above. Mark could feel their eyes following every step as he and Laura disembarked. They were led through dim corridors to a large central chamber. At its far end sat a heavy-built man in worn armor, a scar running down his cheek. His eyes were sharp and untrusting. "You came a long way to find me," he said. "I came for what you have," Laura replied. "A part of a weapon known as the Solar Lance. It is Virellian property, and I want it returned." The man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the chamber. "You mean the energy core?" "Yes, I have it, and I know exactly what it's worth." "It is worth far more as a danger than as a prize," Laura said. "You do not understand the risk." "Oh, I understand," the man said, leaning forward, "which is why I plan to sell it to someone who can pay more than you." Mark stepped forward, meeting the man's gaze. "If you sell it, you won't live to spend the credits. That core isn't stable. Without the right containment, it'll burn through your ship in minutes." The leader's eyes narrowed. "And you know this because?" "Because I've worked with unstable tech before," Mark said. "I've seen what happens when people think they can handle it." The man studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Even if you're right, I still have no reason to give it to you for free." Laura's voice was calm but unyielding. "Then we will make a trade." Mark glanced at her, but she kept her eyes on the leader. After a pause, he gave a slow nod. "What kind of trade?" Laura smiled faintly. "Something you cannot buy. Information about a derelict ship filled with war-era treasures untouched for decades. I will give you its exact location, and you can keep everything inside. In exchange, you give me the core. The man's eyes lit with greed. If your location is real, we have a deal. It is real, Laura said, and you will know it is real before we leave. The next hour was tense. Laura gave him the coordinates, and one of his scouts confirmed the ship was there. True to his word, the leader had the core brought in, a small, heavy container marked with warning symbols in 2 languages. Even through its casing, Mark could feel the faint hum of its power. As they carried it back toward the Silver Wing, Laura glanced at him. 1 piece recovered. Many more to go. Mark tightened his grip on the container. Then we'd better move fast. The war station faded behind them as the Silver Wing slipped back into the dark sea of the Trian Belt, heading toward the next clue in their search. The journey back to Varela was long and tense. The Silver Wing moved through the quiet lanes of space, its engines humming steadily. The energy core they had recovered from the Gray Talons was locked in a secure chamber deep inside the ship. 2 guards stood watch outside it at all times. Mark spent most of the trip checking the containment readings. Even a slight fluctuation could mean trouble. The core was stable for now, but its power was strong enough to burn through steel if released. He could not stop thinking about how dangerous it would be in the wrong hands. Laura, meanwhile, stayed, in constant contact with her advisors back on Varela. She learned that her people were preparing for a possible attack. Several unknown ships had been sighted in the outer sectors, moving closer to their world. On the 4th day of travel, the Silver Wing picked up a shadow on their sensors. A small ship was following them, staying just far enough to avoid interception. Mark stood beside the sensor screen. They are tracking us. Same vector for the last 6 hours. Laura joined him, her eyes fixed on the display. Not pirates. Too patient. Whoever they are, they know we have the core. They might try to take it before we reach Varela, Mark said. She gave a short nod. Then we will not let them. Instead of speeding up, Laura ordered the ship to maintain its course. If the follower wanted to make a move, she would be ready. For 2 more days, the shadow stayed with them. It neither attacked nor spoke. It simply followed. When Varela finally came into view, its golden seas and silver mountain ranges gleaming in the light of its twin suns, Mark expected the follower to disappear. Instead, the shadow ship accelerated, closing the distance. The alarms rang through the Silver Wing. "Incoming vessel!" the pilot shouted. "They are armed," Laura's voice was steady. "Shields up! Do not fire unless fired upon." The enemy ship hailed them. A tall figure appeared on the screen. His armor was dark blue, and his voice was cold. "You have something that belongs to us. Hand over the core, and we will let you live." Mark stepped forward. "You're too late. It belongs to Varela now." The man's expression did not change. "Then Varela will burn." Without warning, the enemy's ship opened fire. Blue energy beams slammed into the Silver Wing's shields, shaking the vessel. The crew returned fire, but the enemy's weapons were powerful. One more direct hit could break through. Mark ran to the weapons console, adjusting the targeting systems. "Aim for their engines. If we slow them down, we can get to the planet's defense range." The next volley from the Silver Wing struck. True. The enemy's forward thrust weakened, giving them just enough time to reach Varela's outer defense grid. Planetary cannons locked onto the attacker, forcing it to retreat. The bridge crew cheered, but Laura remained serious. They will be back, and they will not come alone. The Silver Wing descended toward the capital city. Varela's shining towers rose from the coastline, their crystal surfaces reflecting sunlight. Crowds gathered at the landing platform to welcome the Queen's return. But the celebration was brief. News of the attack had already spread. Inside the royal hall, Laura called an emergency meeting with her council. The core was placed in a sealed chamber, guarded by the most loyal soldiers. Mark stood at the edge of the room as the council debated. One advisor wanted to hide the core deep underground. Another wanted to destroy it. A third argued they should use it to build their own solar lance before their enemies could. Laura raised her hand to silence them. We cannot destroy it. We cannot use it. We must gather the other pieces before our enemies do. If they assemble the lance, no world will be safe. An old council member leaned forward. Your Majesty, that will mean leaving Varela again. Our enemies will strike here while you are gone. I know, Laura said, which is why the defenses must be stronger than ever. That night, Mark walked alone on the palace balcony. The twin moons hung above the sea, their light shimmering on the waves. He had not planned to be part of this war, but he could not walk away now. If the lance was completed by the wrong hands, entire star systems could fall. Footsteps approached. Laura stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. You saved my people today. You also gave our enemies a reason to hate you. Mark gave a faint smile. It wouldn't be the first time someone's hated me. Her expression softened slightly. 5 years ago, you disappeared. I thought you had chosen to stay away. But now I see you never truly left the fight. I thought you were safe. Back then, Mark said quietly, I thought I could leave, and the danger would pass. I was wrong. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Laura turned back toward the hall. Rest while you can. Tomorrow we search for the next piece. But tomorrow came with more trouble than either of them expected. Just after sunrise, the alarm bells rang again. Mark rushed to the control room. Reports were coming in from the outer settlements. Enemy ships had landed in several locations. Armed forces were moving toward the cities. The council gathered once more. Laura's voice was calm but urgent. They are not here for conquest. They are here for the core. Mark knew what that meant. If they get into the palace, they will not leave without it. The defenders of Varela moved quickly. Soldiers took positions along the palace walls. The skies filled with defense drones. Mark joined a squad assigned to protect the core chamber. Hours passed with no direct attack. The enemy seemed to be testing the defenses, striking at outposts, but avoiding the capital. Then, just as the sun began to set, the warning came. A stealth team had breached the outer wall. Mark led his squad through the narrow halls toward the chamber. They reached it just in time to see a blast door half melted from a plasma charge. Enemy soldiers were forcing their way in. The fight was fast and fierce. Mark and his squad pushed them back, forcing the intruders to retreat through the smoke. But as the last of them vanished into the night, Mark noticed something. One of the guards who had been stationed at the core chamber was missing. He turned to Laura, who had just arrived. They didn't just try to take the core. They wanted someone inside to help them next time. Her eyes hardened. Then we have a traitor. The chamber was sealed once more, but Mark knew this was only the beginning. The enemies of Varela were getting bolder. The next attack might not be so easy to stop. The traitor's presence in the palace changed everything. No one knew who it was, but the knowledge that an enemy agent could be walking among them made every conversation tense. The guards watched one another more closely. The council members kept their voices low, and the core of the solar lance stayed locked inside the most secure vault on Varela. Mark spent the next 2 days running security checks, reviewing every record of movement inside the palace. But the enemy had been clever. Whoever the traitor was, they had erased most of their trail. Laura did not wait for the truth to reveal itself. The moment her scouts confirmed the location of another solar lance fragment, she ordered a small, fast mission. It would be easier to avoid the traitor's interference if fewer people knew the details. The new fragment was said to be hidden on a remote ice world called Norath. Its surface was covered in storms so strong that sensors could barely penetrate. The clouds. Old records claimed the piece had been buried in a frozen cavern centuries ago. The Silver Wing launched quietly, without public announcement. Only the most trusted crew were on board. Even so, Mark kept an eye on every movement in the corridors, ready for trouble. The journey to Norath took 3 days. The planet appeared as a swirling ball of white and gray, its storms flashing with blue lightning. As they descended into the clouds, the ship's hull groaned under the force of the winds. The landing was rough. The moment they touched down, icy air howled through the docking ramp. The temperature outside dropped so quickly that frost formed on their helmets in seconds. Mark, Lura, and a small team moved across the frozen surface toward a dark opening in the side of a cliff. According to old star maps, this was the entrance to the cavern. The wind screamed around them as they stepped inside. The air was still cold, but at least the walls blocked the storm. Their lights shone on walls of pure ice, glittering like glass. Every sound echoed deep into the darkness. They reached a massive chamber, its floor covered in frozen pools. At the center was a pedestal, and resting upon it was a black crystal shard, the next fragment of the solar lance. Mark stepped forward cautiously. No signs of traps, but it is too easy. Lura nodded. They will come. She was right. Before Mark could touch the shard, shadows moved in the tunnels behind them. Enemy soldiers emerged, their armor painted with the same dark blue pattern as the attacker from the previous battle. Blaster fire lit the chamber. Mark dove behind a block of ice, returning fire while the team spread out. The air filled with the sharp crack of weapons and the ringing sound of energy blasts striking frozen walls. Lura's voice rang through the chaos. "Secure the shard! Do not let them near it!" Mark sprinted toward the pedestal. Just as his hand closed around the shard, an enemy soldier lunged at him with a blade. The impact knocked him back, sending the shard sliding across the ice. He scrambled after it, sliding on one knee to snatch it up before the soldier could reach it. The moment he touched it, the shard pulsed with energy. A faint hum filled the air, as though the fragment recognized its importance. "Got it!" Mark shouted. The team began to pull back toward the tunnel. The enemy forces followed, but the narrow passage slowed them down. Mark fired over his shoulder until they reached the surface. Outside, the storm had grown worse. Snow whipped across the ground, and lightning split the sky. The Silver Wing waited, with its engines running, but the enemies were not giving up. Their own transport was setting down nearby. The battle turned into a race through the snow. Mark and Lura pushed forward against the wind, while the others provided cover. Energy blasts flashed past them, melting snow into steam. At last, they reached the ramp of the Silver Wing. The moment the last crew member was aboard, the ship lifted into the sky. Enemy fire followed them into the clouds. But soon, even that was lost in the storm. Inside the safety of the ship, Mark placed the shard inside a secure case. Lura stood beside him, her eyes sharp. 2 pieces now, but the enemy will not stop until they have them all. He nodded. Then we make sure we get the last one first. The journey back to Varela was uneasy. They had won another battle, but the traitor remained hidden. If the spy learned where the final piece was, everything could be lost. When they arrived, the shards were placed together inside the vault. Their combined glow was faint but steady, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. That night, the answer to the mystery came unexpectedly. One of the guards on duty approached Mark with a quiet voice. "I saw something. A council member speaking with someone on a hidden channel." Mark followed the lead. Within hours, the traitor was found, a high-ranking advisor who had been feeding information to the enemy in exchange for promises of power. He was arrested before he could warn them about the new shard. But the final fragment's location was no secret to the galaxy. Rumors spread faster than any ship. It lay on a barren asteroid near the edge of known space. Laura and Mark knew this would be the end. Both sides would rush there, and only one would leave with the final piece. The Silver Wing arrived at the asteroid at almost the same time as the enemy flagship. There was no room for stealth now. Fighters swarmed through space, the battle exploding in all directions. Mark led a small strike team to the asteroid's surface, while Laura commanded the fleet above. The ground was rough and jagged, with narrow cliffs and deep cracks. At the far end of a ridge, a metallic structure rose from the rock, the last resting place of the final shard. The enemy forces hit them hard, but Mark and his team fought with everything they had. He could see the shard inside the structure, glowing with the same pulse as the others. Reaching it meant pushing through the last enemy line. Mark's squad fought side by side, each step bringing them closer. At last, he broke through, diving toward the shard and locking it into a secure case. Above them, Laura's voice came over the comm. "Mark, we have them on the run. Bring it home." They left the asteroid with all 3 shards. When they returned to Varela, the shards were sealed away, never to be used for destruction. Laura announced to her people that their world had faced the darkness and endured. Mark stood beside her, knowing that for now the galaxy was safe. But he also knew that somewhere, in the shadows beyond the stars, others would rise to take the place of the enemies they had defeated.